The other day, someone said something to me that really got stuck in my brain. We were in the middle of a disagreement, and he wasn't winning. So he went looking for ammunition, and he decided to run my family name through ChatGPT. He came back with something he clearly felt was useful. Your father, he told me, is corrupt. Let me be very clear, my father is not corrupt. But what bothered me most was not his random accusation. It was the confidence with which he spoke, which was, he explained, because he had looked it up on ChatGPT. Let me repeat that. He looked it up on ChatGPT. And here's the thing that worries me. You can't look something up on ChatGPT. ChatGPT did not look anything up. What these GenAI systems do is generate, hence the term generative AI. Systems like Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini take your question and construct a response. Emphasis on construct. They build something that sounds plausible, not because they found it in some source, but because they produced it based on their training patterns. And that difference matters more than almost anything else about how these tools work. You see, a search engine goes out and retrieves. It finds documents that actually exist, pages that were written by someone and indexed somewhere, and you can follow the link and see the source. A generative model does none of that. It produces language and it completes a pattern. And it then gives you the most statistically plausible response to your input, drawn from everything it was trained on. It has no mechanism for checking whether what it produces corresponds to reality or if it's true in any way. It doesn't even ask that question because it was never built to ask that question, and it has no actual relationship with truth. Which means that the output looks the same whether it's right or wrong. The confidence, fluency, and certainty in the tone are identical whether the contents are true or false. And unless you already know the answer, you have no way of knowing which one you got. And that last part is quite important. Let me give you an example from my own life. Some time ago, I asked Google AI, not the search engine, but Google's generative model, what it knew about me. You know, just like we used to Google ourselves. Now, it told me various things, and some of those were true. But then it said that my father was actually my brother, and that he was married to some woman whose name I've now forgotten, to be honest. To be clear, my father is not my brother. He's my father, and he's married to my mom, whose name I know. I caught its BS because I happen to be an expert on my own family. But here's a question. If I had asked about someone I don't know personally, would I have caught anything? If the output had been about a stranger or a public figure or a medication or a historical event, something outside of my direct experience and expertise, I would have had nothing to catch it against. The model would have been equally confident, the output would have looked exactly the same, and I would have had no way of knowing it was wrong. And that is a problem, because you can only catch errors if you already have the knowledge, and you're usually asking precisely because you don't. Now think about what that means in practice, not in some stupid internet debate where someone's fragile ego can't take the L. Think about other uses. A hiring manager who looks up someone before an interview, or a patient who looks up their medication or their diagnosis, or a teacher who looks up a fact before telling a classroom of children about it. In all of those cases, the person doing the lookup doesn't have the independent knowledge to catch an error. That's why they're looking it up. And whoever's using AI to answer whatever question they have feel like they did their due diligence. They checked. I mean, they looked it up, right? That belief that the process of querying a generative model constitutes verification is what I find most troubling. Now, I know what you probably want to say. And yes, some of these tools have a web search option. So if you turn that on, it searches the internet, so the problem is solved, right? No, not right. When a generative model searches the web, it doesn't show you the source and then let you decide what to make of it. It digests the source and gives you a response. And that digestion is still generative and probabilistic and still capable of misrepresenting what the source actually said, and still very confidently and fluently does so. Also, the sources it finds may themselves be wrong. The model doesn't evaluate them. It doesn't necessarily give you the best information. So no, web search doesn't remove the problem. GenAI still generates. It doesn't understand, it doesn't know, and it doesn't think about anything. A worrying consequence of all of this is, in my opinion, that it leads to a form of psychosis. Now, I'm not exactly talking about the clinical condition. I am more so borrowing the mechanism. What is characteristic of a psychotic episode is not randomness or confusion. It is actually the opposite. It is a coherent internal model of reality that doesn't correspond to external reality. And the person experiencing it has no way of knowing it's not actually reality. The internal model feels true, and it's internally consistent. From the inside, it's indistinguishable from accurate perception. When someone has an episode and they think everyone is after them, that may seem strange to you, but to them it makes perfect sense. What I'm describing with AI-generated misinformation is, of course, a different phenomenon, but with a structurally similar shape. When someone builds their understanding of a person or a topic or an event through generative outputs they believe are retrieved facts, they are constructing a model of reality. That model is coherent. It feels verified. They looked it up. But it may be substantially false. And they won't know. Not unless someone with direct knowledge happens to be present and happens to correct them. And even then, they may not believe the correction because they feel they've checked. This is not a small problem. This is not a problem that affects only careless people. It affects anyone who uses these tools without really understanding what the tools actually are. The hallucination rate in the most controlled, closed, purpose-built AI systems is between 1 and 3%. Now, that percentage may sound small, but in it lives the difference between my father being my father and my father being my brother, but also between solid advice about the medication you're about to take and a deadly dose. And to be clear, in open models like the ones you use, the hallucination rate is much, much higher. Anywhere between 30 up to a whopping 80%. And remember, the model doesn't grade its own errors by their severity. Of course, there are guardrails in place for extreme cases, but most cases aren't that. They are subtle mistakes that change the complete meaning of information. And cumulative misinformation leads to psychosis-like models of a reality that doesn't actually exist. The question I want to leave you with is not whether AI is useful. It is. Under specific conditions, with specific knowledge, it can be a powerful tool. The question is what you believe you are doing when you use it. If you believe you are retrieving, finding something that exists, checking something against a record, you are wrong about what is happening. And that wrongness has a cost. Not always, not every time, but when it does, it has true impact.